the de-banking scandal. And joining me to discuss all of this is Nick Kochan, who's a banking commentator and author of The Washing Machine, Money, Crime and Terror in the Offshore System. Nick, fantastic to have you on. What is going on here? What is going on here? Because when Russia first invaded Ukraine, we heard from a lot of politicians, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that we have a real problem in the UK with dodgy money coming into London, essentially being used to hide blood money from authoritarian regimes and enable oligarchs to accrue huge amounts of wealth. Yet, if you're Gina Miller and want to set up the True and Fair Party, sorry, mate, you can't have a bank account.
Well, let's start with the oligarch question. And I think there's a real key issue here that for a very long time, Britain was very eager to have any possible money from anywhere. And we opened ourselves, our banks, our whole financial system. And let's not focus it only down on banks. We've got all sorts of financial markets and derivatives and all sorts of things that said, just come here. We've got all London's property, for example. Fantastic place for putting your money. And we opened ourselves to the world as a place where easy money could be easily stored, inverted commas, laundered, and it was just all comers, you know, we love you. Now, obviously, with the Ukraine war, suddenly we've got a huge amount of sanctions. Any Russians, you know, involved with Putin, remotely involved with any Russian who's remotely involved with Putin, the whole thing has become so complicated and so, frankly, compromised. It's become incredibly difficult. For example, we've now introduced this law that talks about politically exposed persons. Now, that can mean absolutely anybody. A politically exposed person can be the offspring of a politician, the friend of a politician, the friend of a friend of a politician. You know, it goes everywhere. So this is how it gives the banks huge scope for picking in and picking up you know, Nigel Farage's account, Gina Miller's account, you know, anybody with any political connection at all, and suddenly, lo and behold, they've lost their account. And I've talked to many people to whom that's happened, and it's happened, of course, to many less significant people, and they've said it's an absolute nightmare to lose your account. You feel that you're a non-person, you don't exist, you can't pay for your school fees or whatever it is, and it's a nightmare. So
what is going on here? Is this essentially legislation that we actually do desperately need to stop wrong-uns, toe-wags and ne'er-do-wells having bank accounts in this country who might be wanting to hide dirty money from abroad, that's accidentally sweeping up people like Gina Miller, who I have no doubt is as pure as the driven snow. We might disagree on Brexit, but she's actually a woman I greatly admire. Is that the case, or is there something else going on here? Is it about processing fees attached to this legislation and people saying, well, now we've got to tick all of these boxes to take you on as a new customer? It just ain't worth it.
Well, that's a problem. The banks have been put in the position of the policeman of the financial system of economic crime. So in other words, you know, if a bank sees anything that remotely smells of politics, smells of anything that can give them cause, for example, you know, a lot of people were dealing with Ethiopia and Somalia, you know, merely sending money for relatives out there. They were crossed off the list. They were debanked. I mean, it wasn't just the big politicians that can go to other places or go into crypto or go in, you know, wealthy people who can go into the system is saying, banks, you need this huge compliance system. That system is going to be the policeman for economic crime, for corruption and everything else. So it is the law that says banks have to, or have the right to cross people off, as it were, in the language of banking, de-risking. Get rid of their risk.
Do we need, therefore, a change in the law, perhaps, and that we shouldn't have the same legislation dealing with Mrs. Miggins as deals with someone who is completely non-resident in the UK, just wants to have a bank account here, might be a resident, but is foreign-born with connections to a third-country regime?
Yeah, I think we do. I think we need to much more finely hone our our system of selecting, who is and who is not suspicious. I mean, it's incredibly difficult for the banks. I mean, for example, the banks have a duty, if they see something suspicious, to send it to the National Crime Agency. Now, every year, they send 1 million reports on 1 million transactions to the National Crime Agency. This is barking because the National Crime Agency cannot look through and check out every last source of money for 1 million transactions. We need a much more finely honed system that's going to weed out the criminals, the real criminals, from the people who have got a transaction coming in from Somalia or from Cyprus or wherever. We need much more honed, targeted economic anti-crime law, in my
But what is going on here? Because I think, on one hand, you've got the Nigel Farage situation, which it seems to me very much politically driven in terms of they just don't like his views, do they? They're not fans of Brexit. They don't like him. It's some sort of tick box wokery where they say, you're not our kind of customer, ta-ta, mate. And then you've got Gina Miller, who set up a political party, registered it, had a bank account with Monzo, but didn't say, I am running a political party. This is a political party's bank account. And when that became clear, Monzo then retrospectively said, well, actually, no, that means you can't have a bank account with us. Is that not a bridge too far, essentially, saying that if you're a political party, you can't have a bank account? And if that's so, how on earth would the Labour Party run or the Conservative Party run? Why the True and Fair Party and not the bigger parties?
I can't see that this is proper enforcement of the rules to deny a political party the right to a bank account. It doesn't make any sense to me, and quite frankly, I don't understand it. If the point about the rules are that the rules spot suspicion, and if there's no suspicion, if someone is a genuine, Gina Miller is a genuine political party, I can't see any reason. The problem seems to be this may have been a very local example in NatWest, and I don't know the ins and outs of this story, of this scenario, why Farage was denied his account, other than a personal vendetta, quite frankly. And it seems to me completely inappropriate that the chairman of or the chief executive, rather, of the NatWest disclosed anything about an individual's bank account details to anybody, especially a journalist. Seems to be completely inappropriate. Therefore, completely right that the Rose fell on her sword. But I don't think the answer is more regulation. I think it's possibly less and more targeted.
I mean, on that, actually, it's interesting, isn't it, that there was clearly confidential information about what may or may not have been the amount in Farage's bank account disclosed to the media. Do you think that NatWest could indeed face a big fine, 5% potentially of profits, or 17 million, whichever comes in higher? Do you think that they could be on the hook for that?
I think it's possibly a rather localized incident, and therefore I suspect that the idea of a major fine is somewhat unlikely. I mean, the NatWest has already taken a major hit in its share price. I believe it lost something like £1 million, was wiped off yesterday on the basis of the instability at NatWest. So this is bad for reputation, having to appoint a new chief executive, chairman's position in doubt, head of Coots gone. I mean, the bank, which is 39% owned by the country, remember, that is looking wobbly. So, the chances of a major fine in this one incident, I would slightly query. But the issue of the bank's governance, much bigger issue, that's really an odds and a risk now, I would say.
Yeah, thank you, Nick Kochan. Thank you so much for coming on, explaining all that. Banking commentator, author of The Washing Machine, Money, Crime and Terror in the Offshore System. I'm sure that's actually a fascinating read if you look into the sort of things that were taking place in London, which were really brought to light, I think, by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The amount of dirty money swilling through our capital. You'd be pretty horrified and disgusted.